Basically, I'm trying to talk about how it is that public interest in a problem, a political issue or a problem, changes the way that politicians and civil servants have to deal with it, and how it attributes different political resources to actors in different domains. In particular, the relative role of making coalitions with other interest groups versus mobilizing what we might call expertise, winning according to expert logic as opposed to a political logic, as opposed to a partisan logic. So I try to talk about how these different elements of politics factor in depending on how a public is paying attention to an issue and how the press is covering it. And then I try to integrate that domestic politics framework within a more international two-level game framework. How does this influence international negotiations? How are states bound by the variable salience of an issue in their own domestic arena? I spent the last 6 years writing a book on the topic of how business groups mobilize in the area of hostile takeover regulation, which may seem pretty dry and technical, but in fact this is an area that has large implications for how political economies are organized and how goods are distributed within a given political economy. And so I became interested in the way that business groups can be very effective in controlling political debate in certain periods, and then, as in the recent period on executive pay, how they can lose control very quickly of an area where you would think they would do quite well politically. And so sort of studying this variance has provoked me to several years worth of research on the problem, and I tried to look at it cross-nationally because I'm interested in how this works similarly across different political systems. So I've done empirical work in France, Germany, the Netherlands, and Japan. The EU is, for me, as for many scholars, a great laboratory in which to consider how international and domestic influences commingle and how various domestic political issues can be refracted differently in the international or even the transnational arena. And one of the things we talk about in my seminar is whether issues get treated as domestic issues, that is to say where there might be a French interest, a German interest, and a Dutch interest, or whether various groups across different countries, consumers, say for example, come together to support or oppose a proposal. I'm looking forward to sort of expanding the framework I've been using to analyze what are really the big issues going on now of institutional engineering in response to what one might call the crisis of the euro or the crisis of austerity going on across the different European countries. What does institutional engineering look like when suddenly public opinion is concerned and bond markets are concerned? How does public opinion structure politics? How do bond markets constrain what politicians can decide? And how does the EU refract these different domestic and international pressures in resulting in the politics that we get, the sort of outcomes that we get? How do we wind up with an EU that's much more powerful than it was 2 years ago in an area when no one thought that there would be future institutional development? I'm pretty interested in it.